How's it? Welcome back to Living Mojave Green, our wacky experiment out here in the gorgeous Mojave on how to live more sustainably. Beautiful day here, as you can see. Had a couple of days of rain, and so hopefully we're going to have some gorgeous wildflowers this next year. So, a couple of things that I want to share with you guys is we discovered really soon that we need to be simple about these solutions, and we need to be smart about the solutions that we look for. And if you look around you, you look at nature, you can find some very simple solutions. I'm generally not the most simple person. I'm an educator, wannabe scientist, and I generally try to make things too complicated. At least that's what my family said. So we're going to be trying to keep things simple. Try to keep things smart. One of the ways we do things smart out here in nature is we look at nature and use nature as a teacher. One of the things that I had an opportunity growing up in South Africa was to do some wildlife monitoring, some work in some of the parks. And I remember one particular situation we had to monitor in a park in South Africa, the Umfolozi, where we actually had to walk through these little savanna thickets. And on the very first day, the Zulu guide, the Zulu ranger, basically said, you know, you white man, you're just not that smart. And basically what he was saying is, you know, observing this, being in nature, we know that people who live in this environment know that the black rhino hangs out in those thickets. And if you shake him up, bad things are going to happen. Well, sure enough, about the fourth, fifth day into it, we came across a black rhino in one of these dense savanna thickets, and we got charged. And we had to try to climb a thorn bush, that thorn tree that was about as thick as my finger. And so just this concept that look to nature to be your teacher. Another thing is, you know, we've come up with technology, which is simply our solutions to problems that we face. And even this solar PV system back here, we need to use it appropriately and use it smart. So in this section, we're going to kind of look at the sun. You know, beautiful day here. We get tons of sun here in the Mojave, so it's a great resource for us. But how do we use it smart? Things like passive solar. Let's look at how we can use it passively. So that's things like, how did we orientate the house so that it had the least southern exposure? A lot of the passive solar homes in the desert tend to overheat, so we chose the opposite, and we'll kind of talk about that. Another thing was lots of shade, overhangs, and we basically have a big roofscape on the house up there and learning center to do that. Another one would be solar thermal. I mean, the jackrabbits, we were just talking about this last night, they figured this out a long time ago, as did the desert tortoise. The earth will store the sun's energy. That's one of the things that the sun does for us, is it heats the earth, drives our climate basically. But let's take advantage of it. Here in the desert, the soil a foot under the ground stays pretty much constant year-round, and it's incredible. It's 62, 65 degrees year-round because it's so dry, the heat and cold doesn't conduct down through the soil. So let's mimic that. So what we did was to take the house and drop it back into the hill a little bit. Couldn't go as far as we wanted to because of earthquake restrictions, but that's an example of solar thermal. We've got some amazing vegetables this year because they're sunk, the little area where they are is sunk back into the house on one of the little patios, and they're up against the house. And that house is warmed up every day from the southern sun, and we're going to mimic that. We're going to look at other ingenious little solutions like a tram wall or greenhouses that are orientated in such a way to grow food, clean the air, and also heat and cool homes. And then, of course, when you think solar, we always go to some of the technologies, which would be PV, which is what we got behind us here. There's a little bit old school, cheaper, the amorphous, and we'll be looking at what kind of panels. Here we're taking the sun's electricity, sun's light, photons, and we're converting it directly into electricity. And here in the Mojave, this is a really big discussion right now as to whether locally we're going to take responsibility and generate our own electricity, or we're going to allow huge industrial scale plants to come in and basically tear up a lot of desert and maybe destroy our sustainable way of life to generate the electricity. So I'm going to take a look in this particular blog at some of those technologies and then some of the local solutions and just how fun and ingenious they are. Just thinking the last few days about how we've had a few cloudy days and all of a sudden we had to run the generator and how obnoxious that was, where I've just already, in a year's time of having our solar on the home setup, I got used to free energy, and that just feels good. We're doing the right thing, but quite frankly, some of you are probably coming to a site like this because you don't want to pay those big energy bills, and we're looking at those electricity costs going up dramatically in the next few years. So how's it done then with the solar PV? Really fun stuff. These panels, this is actually a high-end panel, and we really recommend high-end panels rather than the cheaper ones, the black ones that you'll see that are amorphous. But this is actually a crystal panel, and it's only a 10-watt panel, but it's efficient enough, good enough that actually Jono is going to use it to power his van, this little panel here, 10 watts. The trick is you've got to kind of understand what the basic components are, and really the components are pretty simple and they're coming down in price and therefore available. And start small, just like with all of this. Pick an area where you have some resources and fits within your budget. So this is a little system we put in to just power our Airstream trailer when we first moved out here. And what you're looking at is some basic electrical boxes on and off so you don't kill yourself, a charge controller so that you don't overcharge the batteries, and an inverter. You don't have to have an inverter if you just choose to work on DC current, the 12-volt current, but then your average fridge doesn't run on that. Your average computer chargers don't run on that kind of stuff. TVs. So it makes life a little tricky. My wife Tammy would say the first few years here were pretty much like hell because we didn't quite get this part started. So those are the basic components. This changes it into AC 110, what your normal thing. The big trick is, where do you start? The first thing to do, as I said, figure out your resources. The next place is to think of your specs. What do you actually need? What are you trying to run with this? So maybe you don't run your whole house. Maybe you still run a lot of things on gas, or you run it on thing. And this is just for your shop. So you've got to spec it out. And we'll be looking at that and doing a little how's it done video and little how's it done series on how you do it. But it's speccing it out. So measuring what it takes to run that thing. So you have to measure the amount of energy, the amount of electricity you need. And from there, you just go ahead and figure out which parts you can actually install. A couple of things that are important to be realizing is when we talk about passive and how easy this is, but it takes a more active lifestyle. So one of the things you have to know is it takes some maintenance. For example, these batteries, you need a really good capacity on these batteries. These are deep cycle batteries, but you have to take good care of them. You have to keep them filled with water. These are old school lead acid batteries. We hope we're going to better technology real soon. But this battery right here basically is done. It's not working properly anymore, and that's because we sometimes allow the system to run down too low. In other words, we're not monitoring careful. So you've got to stay active. One of the key things is you have to change your lifestyle. You don't just get to come home and totally flop down in front of the TV every night. You might have to go move the generator. And I think that's really cool because it really connects you with the earth around you. And when you realize that, oh yeah, I got a free day's worth of electricity today, and I'm doing the right thing for sustainability and for the future, it feels really good. So this is a good spot to look at a couple of other ideas, passive solar and solar thermal. Probably the solar thermal first. This is really pretty dang amusing. I teach agriculture, but this poor old dead now in the winter tomato bush over here, tomato bush, tree, whatever it was, produced 0 tomatoes this last year. That's because we just don't seem to be able to grow things real well. So this winter, when we decided to use this little area that's sunk into the earth, you can see I'm down here, it's got this wall that heats up in the afternoon. I thought that our winter vegetables were going to freeze as well, but we are super proud of our little production over here. And we've just been eating away at the kale and some of the other stuff. I got my mint to go with my lamb, and that's all cool. And so that's a case of just passively using the sun to work for you. So the other side of this is the actual solar thermal. You'll notice we're sitting here, we've actually dug the house back into the hill 6 feet. And that helps tremendously. We don't have heat inside the house yet, but we're able to keep the house at a decent temperature. If you call 45 degrees on the 18-degree nights a few weeks ago, keeping it reasonable. You know, you go back to old school with sleeping with a beanie on your head. And we're getting ready to put in our next part of solar thermal, which will be in our floor down here. We've got plastic PEX tubing in the floor, and we're going to have solar thermal panels that just basically run water through a black box and heat solar thermal panels. And those are going to go right up on the roof here. And we're basically going to have radiant floor heat, which is the most amazing, comfortable heat. And again, kind of behind the curve, but hoping to have that in a month or so here before we don't even need it again for this summer. So again, summer thermal, passive. Passive is also as simple as where you put your trees. We've planted some trees up here that are deciduous to shade this side. We're going to have a little waterfall here that's going to provide some good looks, but also a little bit of cooling. And then you can see this massive overhang on the west side. So in the desert here, the south and the west, and how you orientate your house are really important, okay? And so that's what we did here, was to protect from the rain, but also to protect these windows from direct sunlight in the summer. In the winter, we got the opposite, which is kind of cool. Is the sun's low enough in that southern sky that they actually hit the windows, shine through, heat the concrete, basically solar thermal, heat the inside of the house and help warm the house up. So great, ingenious, you know, nature it's just super simple, and some of this stuff's just self-evident, but you got to kind of stop and, depending on your site, adapt. So here we had this big hill behind the house, and instead of building up on the hill and getting too much sunlight, we decided to use passive and solar thermal and build into the hill.